name's Hobie, and today I want to talk about what I think makes a good fighting game. Be warned, I don't have many experiences with fighting games besides the basic games like Smash Bros, Street Fighters, and Mortal Kombat. If this is your sort of thing, feel free to subscribe and like the video if you enjoy it. Anyway, let's get right into it. Let's start with characters. At the very bare bones level of character design, you should have depth to your characters. Take a game like Super Smash Bros. For example. Each character is different and has a unique moveset while being in base classes. For example, let's take Link, Ness, and Samus. Link is a sword fighter, and you can come to this conclusion from the fact that he wields a sword and uses it in combat. He's in the medium weight class and has projectiles as well. This makes him a well-rounded character with a moveset the player has to master. He can even be categorized with the subclass of having projectiles due to his bow and arrows and use of bombs. Ness is a magic user and most of his attacks are based on that concept. He does use both a yo-yo and a bat for his smash attack, but most of this violence stems from his hand-to-hand combat or magic. Ness is also a medium weight fighter, but his jumps are higher than the average character, giving him longer and more of a title of floaty. His main class is being a fighter with magic abilities added on. Finally, Samus is in the gunner class with a medium weight. She is a gunner due to the majority of her attacks involving her blaster. She has projectiles being one of her blaster shots and the bombs she can drop using down B. Now these three were all in the same weight class but different fighter class. Characters should have a wide range of attributes that keep the roster balanced and varied. Now let's move on to the next thing a fighting game should have, which is a plot, if you want one. The core to any game is having a story that the player can easily follow along with and understand. Most fighting games have a story mode where the main character, or one of the characters on the roster, goes on an adventure or has some sort of reason to meet and fight the other characters on the roster. The story can be simple like in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate with a big bad coming and you have to defeat it to save the other characters, or unlock them on the roster. It could also be as complicated like in any Dragon Ball fighting game. You don't have to include a plot if you just want a beat 'em up game focused solely on fighting. The story gives the characters some background, especially if they're only from your game and not an outside party like in Super Smash Bros., Dragon Ball, or Naruto. If you do want a story in your fighting game, you'll need the basics. The first thing you'll need is character or premise you want to focus on. Then you'll need a villain or villain characters to fight the protagonist. Regardless, you'll need a protagonist, an antagonist, and some sort of reason as to why the protagonist wants to fight them. This only matters in story-based games or segments. A fighting game is a fighting game, so the story is one of the least important things to focus on. Most people play fighting games to play multiplayer, to be honest. Now let's focus on stage design. Stages should be either simple or have bits of complexity mixed into them. Stages don't need to be overly complicated to be a good stage for fighting. Take the Great Cave Offensive, or 75M, the Donkey Kong retro map, in the Super Smash Bros. Series for example. The Great Cave Offensive is huge and with so many stage hazards that it makes the stage unplayable. This could also be said for this Donkey Kong stage, 75M. There's little to no stage to really stand on and there's a constant stream of barrels coming your way. Good stages have stage hazards and be somewhat big, but if it actively disturbs the gaming experience, I don't think it should be in the game. This is why for competitive matches, the stages that are valid are bare bones, or without these hazards to put the players on an even playing field. His perfect stage would be a decent size with some platforms and possibly some stage transformations that don't ruin the experience completely. Now let's move on to mechanics. For the basics of your fighting game, you need to have some mechanics. Your matches should have a winner and a loser and a method to determine that, be it stocks or just depleting an enemy's health bar. Winners win the majority of rounds or just one round, having rounds usually be in odd numbers. The fighting mechanics are also a core part of the experience. Having things such as combos, tilt attacks, special attacks, etc. give the fighting more weight to it. Having combos seems like just bare bones of the modern era, whether it be combos with specific button mappings like in Street Fighter, or just a string of attack patterns like in Super Smash Bros. It's now become a staple in the fighting gaming industry to have these mechanics. Depending on if your game has platformer aspects, you'll want to have recoveries, which are similar to jumps but with higher altitude. They're meant to get your character back on the stage into the battle. Now let's talk about what I would do if I were to make a fighting game. If I were to make a fighting game, it would be mostly story-based with a versus mode as well to satisfy the multiplayer scene. I have some concept art here of what I think the main character would look like along with some storytelling to flesh out the environment. The game is set in a futuristic place with our protagonist, Jin, going on an adventure to become the strongest user in his region. His goggles have elemental powers, and when worn, they grant him the ability to manipulate electricity, with the drawback of it being it uses up most of his energy. Jin is a half human and half a part of a species called plugins. Plugins have the ability to store energy in specific article of clothing or accessory. There are 5 species, and I plan to go more into detail in a new series I'm dubbing Let's Make a Video Game, or Let's Make just any sort of concept. It's still a work in progress. Stay tuned for that coming later this summer. Isn't that cool? So, in conclusion, balance and varied characters, simple stage design, useful mechanics, and a basic understanding of a plot, if applicable, are needed to make a worthwhile fighting game. While these aren't the definitive aspects that make a good fighting game, they're more of a part of the fundamentals of it all. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave your opinions in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.